A good day to those of you who are watching on YouTube, and another greeting to those of you who are with me in person. We have a nice full crowd today on a holiday weekend. I was mindful of the occasion of Memorial Day and its sad foundation in memory of those who have given their lives in service for the protection of our freedoms and now have gone from their labors and into their eternal rest. And to try and use that as a jumping off point for the message of the day, I wanted to speak today about change. And my thought is that death presents itself with all of its mystery as this change, a jumping off point beyond which we cannot see. And I think the one thing that we do know is that the kind of change that you and I can experience, even right up until the very end of our days, is no longer something that we see beyond. So I guess my hope is sort of in a Mark Twainish kind of way that people who have passed on from our sight are living in some bliss and rest and don't need to work or solve complex issues or navigate crises the way life is built for us. Life is built for us on the navigation of one thing after another. And I don't know if any of you are weary, but I'm a bit weary these days of the one thing after another. And if you are, I have empathy with the struggle. I do think change is a really important topic, obviously, for the Caron Chapel audience, and not simple, that there's a ton of things to reflect on and think about. I think one of the things that really caught my eye this week, I happen to be a big fan of a TV show called Ted Lasso. I don't know if any of you know that, but it's a really remarkable television show. And so that's a plug for TV, but there you go. It's in its third season, and just this week, my wife and I watch the Ted Lasso episodes each week as they come along. And just this week, Ted, who's the lead character, was challenging one of his co-stars to be sensitive to the reality that today many of us are judged by our worst moments. And I will say, if you were to judge me by my worst moment, I would not be here. No one would trust me with this job. No one, I would not be in the marriage I'm in. I would not have the friendships that I have. If people were to run back the Jack story, even sober, there are some things that I've done that are sufficiently grave in their significance while I had stopped drinking, as to be really the greatest embarrassments of my life. And I'm not about to share them in case you're wondering, but because I don't want you to run me out of town. So, and I love that a current TV show was challenging one of the members of this beautiful tribe of people that are depicted in the Sullivan series to be generous of heart and spirit, and to realize that it is cruel for us to take a moment of embarrassment or difficulty or seeming failure and brand somebody with it as if it defines entirely who they are. So if you look at somebody, you're like, oh, that's the person who pulled the chair out from under me when I was in middle school, and they're 48. That's like a little bit on the extreme side. And there's a term that we've developed recently in relation to politics and media culture, which is called cancel culture. And it applies to this. It's the idea that you could be a person in the public sphere and have one major sort of event come up. And some of these are very major. I don't mean to dismiss misconduct in all of its various forms, because it's horrible when you're the victim of the consequences of people's brokenness. But I also really have to tell you that I am a deep believer that who I am today is not defined entirely by who I was at previous moments of my own And I want you to know that I'm happy to extend you that opportunity. And one of the things I love telling patients here is that they don't need to see themselves as permanently fixed in some sort of frame on the wall, whether it's the post office or wherever, where they're like branded with the scarlet letter that says, you did this, and so we will never see you in any other light than the, puking at the family Christmas or whatever it is. And one of the things that also occurred to me this week was that the cancel culture term is a new term, but shunning is an old term in historical and cultural context. So this is not a new thing. We have been erasing people and telling them they are no longer welcome for a very long time for a whole host of different reasons. And interestingly, today we don't shun for some things that we used to shun for, and some people shun in one setting that don't shun in another. So that points to the possibility that some of this shunning is not wise, right? Because one of the other parties of that is, I'm going to generously say, making an error. If, as I used to say, if faithful Christians have been disagreeing about stuff for hundreds of years, you don't need to know the right answer to one of those questions to stay sober. And that's in relation to this too. Like and we don't need to go down the laundry list of which flaws we are going to say are redeemable and which are not. And sadly, I think this is one of the things that it becomes like the road that people go down. It's like, we don't like these people because if this is on the checkerboard of your history, you're no longer welcome here. Or we don't see you as a person who's a candidate for this job. Or we don't see you as a person who can teach our children. We don't see you as a person who can marry our daughter. Like whatever. Because of something that happened X number of increments of time ago. And I do realize if somebody beat you up yesterday, I wouldn't go trusting them today. So time has a part to play in this. But another thing that has a huge part to play in this is the capacity of human beings to change, to authentically move into difference. And I hope that you believe in that more than I used to, because of who you are. You are sitting in a room that depends on your willingness to entertain the possibility of this thing that I'm talking about. And I don't know if you're a patient and you are afraid that you may not be able to change and afraid that the people who love you are never gonna see you in a different light. There's a bunch of those people, don't raise your hands. And then I also don't know if you're a loved one or an alumnus or someone else who has been afraid to hope in the possibility of the change. So there's a ton of fear around this subject. And the stakes are immensely high. I talked about Memorial Day, and in a few weeks, one of the things we'll do on a Saturday morning is we'll have people coming back to this campus, and we'll be beginning a celebration day, an alumni celebration that just is like, hoorah! But we always begin the alumni celebration with a memorial service in here. And the honored dead of that memorial service are the people who have passed away, sadly, the large majority of them from suicide and overdose. I would love to tell you that we have really nice range of actuarial sort of profile of the ways people die after they come to Caron, but we don't. The large number of people who have been patients at Caron pass away, to our knowledge, previous to natural causes and late in life from overdose and suicide. These early deaths. We just had one that I was aware of that was the onset of a very significant illness that was not, to my mind, addiction related. And I as I called the family, which is one of the things I do, I call families when we learn that our alumni have passed away. As I called the family, I was so grateful to be able to call a family that had lost someone not to overdose or suicide. It was by far the exception rather than the rule in those contexts. So without getting lost in the morbid and mortal, I believe in the capacity of the human being to change. And I believe in the capacity of the family to change. And I'm not sure I would put one of those, in essence, first over the other, chicken or the egg. But I will say that I've dug into this material, and I've gotten myself lost. I was anxious when I was thinking about delivering an address once again on the subject of change, because I've talked this thing to death. That's a bad pun, but I was able in my mind to summarize a few sort of takeaway issues for what I think about today and in this moment, and I'd like to just tick them off, and then we'll move on to the celebration and readings and the prayers that will be a part of where we are each, no doubt, somewhere in relationship to a process of change. I have been gifted with the freedom to not be intoxicated for 34 years and plus, which is a remarkable fact. And as I was reflecting on the decades of my sobriety, one of the things I was talking with my wife this weekend about was a way in which I have changed. It's definitely a change that has come in me from my recovery. But I'm sad to say it's in the last 15 years. So I had 15 years prior to what I'm about to talk about in which there's not many able to be said about me. But today, I believe I can be described as a family man. I am so grateful to be in the marriage I am in. I have the unbelievable gift that my one younger stepson said to me a few months ago in one of those awkward moments where I was introducing myself as Jared's stepdad. And he looked up to me after the person walked away and said, "Just say I'm your dad. Just say you're my dad." That was world-changing for me. And this weekend, the thing I was most excited about was yesterday having the grandkids over for dinner, and they're giving me their own private concert in their bedroom. It was just freaking adorable. Sorry for the near expletive there. But, because I haven't been able to change that, by the way. The Lord is still working on me. That's such a poor excuse. So, I would not have been able to be described in that way. Not only would I not have had these boys in my life and their significant others and these 5 and 10-year-old girls, but I would not have known to have seen that as a profound lack in my life. I had to have it to know what it meant to me. And I'm a tad embarrassed by that. And it is sheer gift that this has happened. It is the fruit of, to some extent, long effort and labor, for sure. But one of the people that has most affected me in the study of change is a guy who wrote a book. Now it's, I think, old. It might be 10 or more years old. A guy named William Miller. Really important person in my and many of our staff lives, because he's the principal founder of a thing called motivational interviewing. But Bill Miller's this brilliant guy who studied change in people's lives, and he has this whole method for eliciting motivation to change, which is awesome, by the way. It's really cool. And then here he comes back to the sphere of behavioral health care with this really interesting book a few years ago. Its title is Quantum Change. And what he did was he did a qualitative, not a research-driven sort of, he did a number of surveys on people who were like, yeah, I went through an effort to try and change, but all of a sudden, like, you know, like I was caterpillar and now I'm butterfly, or I was, you know, Jekyll and now I'm Hyde, or whichever way that, I don't know who's who, but like, you know, like Scrooge or the Grinch or whatever, like his heart threw 3 sizes that day. These miraculously unbelievable transformations that happen more often than the sciencey people want to admit. Oh, the cancer was like grievous, and we go in for another scan, and it was like, well, it just seems to be gone. You know, like you appear to be cancer-free, and the doc's like scratching their head. I have a great side story about that. I have a guy who I was a pastor, and we administered baptism to a man who was completely like no telemetry on the screen, except that he was on life support. And when they disconnected life support, he had the nerve to wake up And then, which was sort of, you don't know this family, but anyway, this guy is awake, and he says, "Did you all baptize me?" And people were like, "How could you possibly have known that you were baptized? You were supposed to be completely non-responsive, and you never know when you're with a person who seems to be non-responsive and when they will be hearing anything." But the greatest part of that story is that the senior pastor who was mentoring me at the time had holy water that he brought back from the River Jordan in the Middle East. Of course, that's not the water that Jesus walked in per se, because that water's flowing down the current. But anyway, he used this holy water to baptize this church elder who had never been baptized. And we're in the hospital the next day, and the doctor comes up, and this pastor's name was Mitchell, and he goes, "Reverend Mitchell." And John turns around and goes, "Yes." And he says, I'm Dr. blah, blah, blah. I'm the, intensive care person. Is there any way we could get some of that water? So I love that story, true story. So there's a head scratchingness about remarkable change. And that does not mean it doesn't occur. The head scratching is because there's a mystery to the phenomenon of dramatic change. And in my previous addresses of this topic, one of the things I've tried to tell people is that in addiction recovery, you are not shooting for incremental change, right? This is a common mistake, and I'll call it that people make coming to treatment here is, I only need to change this. I only need to stop drinking. I only need to stop, like the paid sex encounters, or I only need to stop the gambling thing, or I only need to stop the gambling, the paid sex encounters, and the drinking. And the truth is that we are systemic beings. We exist in interconnectedness with other people and with other things. And so if you change one of those things, A or B will happen. A is other things will change, domino effect. Or B is you will revert, or you will substitute, or in some way. This is a systems theory in action here. So fish tanks and ecosystems and our own organismic health. They tell you this, the chiropractor will tell you this. If you start having to limp in one side, you'll go out of alignment in other places. And there's no way to avoid that. But there's also no way to avoid that in the conduct of our day-to-day lives. So, as you begin to embark on an incremental change, and all of you with the wristbands, I pray you are, and those of you without the wristbands, I would also encourage you to think of this as a time to make incremental changes. But be advised that they will domino, and that they will ripple, and that suddenly at some point you'll be able to look back and go, gosh, huge change has occurred in our world. Or you will look back and go, it fizzled. We are back in the same gerbil wheel that we were in before. Maybe with a different set of acting out scenarios, but with the same hurt and pain and fear and misery. Great message, Jack. There is hope in this. And there is definitely a call. So there is, and this is one of the Miller insights in the book Quantum Change, is that, and Carl Jung said this long ago to the co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, Bill Wilson, is that there is not a guaranteed method by which to induce profound transformation. But what Carl Jung said, which is fascinating, he says, but you might want to hang around people who have had one. I think that's remarkably wise. Because it's those of us in the community of belief in the power of change who are not going to skeptically and sarcastically and snidefully dismiss the emergence of the butterfly from the chrysalis. So prepare for dramatic change. You are called to this place for some reason. Honestly, there is movement in the universe that is there are flows that are at work and bringing you into this room and this day and that chair that you're sitting in. And change is around you. One of the things that is also, I think, of interest in the Miller text is that in interviewing people who had had dramatic change happen in their lives, by far the majority of people did not take credit for it themselves. By far the majority of people who had been interviewed because they were known to be people who had manifested dramatic change said that they described it as a gift, the activity of the divine spirit, or just the weird, benefit of other people and things in their lives, which I'm not sure are contradictory hypotheses. I think that we receive this change way more than we achieve it. What if we are closed-minded to its possibility? We are putting a major obstacle in the possibility of it happening. So please join me in being a person who believes in this. Please join me in some willingness to not define people by their worst moment, even if it was only a few weeks ago. Please join me in working together to cultivate and foster even incremental changes that are the seed work of this tidal wave of transformation. And when you see the flip, applaud. It's amazing when it happens. It happens here all the time. One of the things I love to think about is this particular center aisle and how many people have walked up here to walk to this mic and get a point or whatever. This is one of these weird places where you can definitely point to right here and say, people have stood here having dramatic numbers change, more than I think at the subway or the IRS office or whatever. This is a place where this occurs. And you have come to put yourself in proximity to a ton of people who know what this is like. And yes, the alternative is dire, but this is also a place of incredible hope and possibility. So let's not get in the way of it happening today. Thank you.